aga nüüd jälle keerame oma jutu inglise keele peale, nii et siin see järgnev vestlus tulebki inglise keeles ja ootame teie küsimusi. Kui ei oska inglise keeles küsida, küsige eesti keeles, tõlgime ära, et see ei ole probleem. But let's start our discussion now here, and the topic is Europe and psychedelic care. So all the panelists are already introduced. They don't need further introduction. And Tadeusz, I will start maybe from you. Still the same question. Why you were very optimistic that Europe could be in the forefront in the world on those issues. Why Europe is not?
Right. I think, you need to be optimistic and you need to kind of shoot to the moon and be very ambitious. And I am actually kind of positive that we can move the needle. But if we are to discuss why we are not where we want to be, we need to step back a bit from psychedelics and understand that there are a few limitations that we see in Europe that will likely actually result in seeing these treatments maybe a little later than the US. One thing is simply in economic terms and access to capital. Companies find it much easier to scale in the US. We have less capital. Europe is more risk-averse. And so, they just prioritize the US. So that would be one reason. The other reason is that Europe is fragmented. Again, US is the biggest market when it comes to healthcare, pharmaceuticals, if you like. And it's easier there, whereas in Europe, in fact, you don't have the EU when it comes to healthcare, but you have 27 separate healthcare systems, and companies need to, because in the end, it will be drug developers, biotech companies, or pharmaceutical companies that very likely will be bringing these treatments to patients. And these companies in Europe have to negotiate country by country, negotiate conditions, file for marketing authorization in a given country, and then discuss the reimbursement and the pricing. So it is a challenge, to have this fragmentation, because different countries will have different evidentiary requirements, if you like, for the type of data they need to approve treatments in a country and then reimburse it. So maybe I would see this as two main challenges, but I think we can be excelling on other fronts in terms of, for instance, prioritizing public health over, kind of excessive will for profits. And this will be especially important in psychedelics, and I'm sure we'll be discussing this, but, there are these tendencies to strip psychedelics of treat even, or kind of psychological support, and deliver them as another antidepressants. So I think in Europe we can really make sure that we put the needs of people front and center.
Dr. Kleinberg, what is the dream for a doctor, where Europe should be, how widely those treatments should be available, and time frame when this could happen?
During next 3 years. And also in Estonia, it's very important that substitution, that the price of the medicine, if it's too high, then it is very difficult for our patients, because Estonian market for medicine is anyway very expensive for patients. So it is a local regulation should be moving also very quickly after regulating this drug as a medicine to treatment. Then Estonia is not very eager to cover those expenses for our patients. This is the next big struggle, which we are still in the end of struggling for ADHD treatments for that. So people could have them without high expenses. So it will be the next fight, actually, I think. But yes, in dreams, during the next 3 years, pretty lovely.
In dreams, how many drugs, what drugs? All those that were on screen?
Not all. No, I would be happy if MDMA would be possible and maybe psilocybin. So and also in ketamine use there is a huge possibility. It can increase already during next year, because if people are starting to know, they will also demand it more, and this is also pressure for doctors to provide what is needed.
Dr. Veede, how expensive is in Estonia ketamine treatment at this point? You're providing it in your clinic, that's a private clinic.
Well, the treatment modality that we offer is the ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, and then this modality, I mean, it's like there is no no total price, because it's like a process, but it's rather expensive because it's very time-consuming. So I would say that if they say like first to actually get to the treatment and until the end of the first integration session, the whole cost is about 1,000 euros. And well, it does get a little more, it does get cheaper along the way after we have done the initial screening and then the first preparation sessions. We don't need to do some of these things again.
And the patient has to pay this 1,000 euros themselves, or is the state covering anything?
Well, there actually is like, to some extent, the private insurance companies do cover it. But I haven't really delved into this topic. This is just the information that I get from the patient, because some of them just ask for the bill, for example. So it is covered as usually it is with the larger companies. So it's included. You have a budget for a total of mental health expenses, and then it is covered.
One question that came up here during the pause, that how in Estonia the ketamine is illegal substance. How is this therapy legal?
Well, ketamine is illegal to use outside the medical context. And this is true for many other medications, also psychiatric medications. So that for prescription medications, it is basically illegal to acquire them and use them just on your own. It doesn't differ from the other things, basically. It is just because it is known to some extent as a party drug, and it is known as a psychedelic. So people think of it for that reason a bit differently. But actually it is not. One of the things that is true for ketamine that doesn't exist for most of other psychotropic medications is that it is to be used only inside the medical facility. So you cannot prescribe ketamine for home use in Estonia.
So in other words, you will come to your office and then you will use the spray?
Yeah, we do injections.
Okay.
Yeah, but basically
the spray was the first.
Yeah, the Spravato, the esketamine spray. This is also it is written inside the protocol that it's only for use only inside the clinic, and you cannot prescribe it to somebody at home. But for example, in US, you can, and I've also heard in Germany. I'm not really sure about that, but definitely in US, you can. The ketamine treatment is performed in the way that you get after this medical screening. You get a green light from the psychiatrist, and then you get the prescription, and then you will go to the pharmacy and you can buy the ketamine lozenges, which they dissolve in your mouth, and it does give the ketamine effect. Yeah. It is from the mouth. It doesn't absorb as well. It's a bit it differs from. Intramuscular and intravenous use. It is basically 100%. You always know for sure that everything, which you inject, everything works. But with this kind of method, it is not. It can vary a bit. But what I'm trying to illustrate is that the practices can be quite different from country to country. And in Estonia, you cannot prescribe it like that.
Mr. Kaup, let's come back to this computers and the brain research and then the psychedelics. We are now at the verge of another big revolution, that's AI. And I can imagine that when you ask AI now what it feels to take this drug, AI will research all those huge databases and will come up with some kind of answer. And this answer can be used in modeling. How will AI help this research?
I think there might be some potential, and there's some research that has been done that has used artificial intelligence to kind of model hallucinations. I think if you kind of directly ask an AI model to, what does it feel like, then you're just going to get a pattern of something. But as we know, AI tends to kind of, at least in the artificial intelligence research, there's a lot of discussion about this notion of hallucination. That if you kind of ask certain things from an AI, it kind of gives completely nonsense answers, and they kind of define that as hallucination. I'm not really sure that that really makes any sense in terms of a hallucination, what we're talking about during a psychedelic experience. However, if you look at, for example, convolutional neural networks, and you see alterations, you can do certain kind of alterations to convolutional neural networks that essentially process pictures. You kind of get patterns that mimic a little bit these type of psychedelic phenomenology or psychedelic visual illusions. And we've actually done like a really small pilot study on kind of having people with psychedelic experiences look at AI-generated psychedelic images. I mean, we didn't really find anything particularly interesting there. I mean, I think to use it in research, I would say it's more of a useful tool in data analysis and these type of things rather than looking into the hallucinations of an artificial intelligence model.
I remind our audience that all questions are welcomed in shortly, but let's continue with Mr. Hawrot. One, I think, side effect of this petition will be that the awareness of this on these issues in Europe will increase. So what tactics, and you've seen how different European countries are dealing with those issues, what tactics you recommend to use here in Estonia that are successful to influence public opinion, to influence politicians in that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that there will need to be a lot of hard work happening, and the people who here are active and try to collect signatures, you just need to be everywhere, from some kind of Sunday agriculture markets to big festivals to being, of course, media is always the best opportunity, but you do not always get the proper airtime, and yeah, there will be a lot of this hard work to be.
But you've probably seen how the public opinion in some countries have shifted, let's say about weed, marijuana, how you can call it. In Germany recently, Portugal, we have Holland, of course. So how those shifts in public opinion happen on those issues?
I think that we kind of get a better understanding on the safety profiles of certain compounds. Around 15 years ago, there was a study done by PAREA chair Professor David Nutt on looking at relative harm of different drugs, if you like. And then we learned that at the very beginning there was alcohol, and then nicotine, crack cocaine, heroin, and some psychedelics. Most of them, or all of them, were at the very end side of things. So one thing that should be driving this progress is our better understanding of these compounds and their kind of safety profiles. Otherwise, the most important thing in my mind will be that we walk them through the clinical trials, psychedelics, and then slowly, with time, the public and everyone else will start seeing them as valid mental health interventions like any other kind of prescription that we have.
It's very slow, but we need it in 3 years.
Well, I wish it was 3 years. So when I was setting up PAREA, I was thinking that we will see first psychedelic treatments approved in Europe in 3 years, but unfortunately MAPS pulled out from Europe. So MAPS is this organization now. It's kind of became Lykos, a drug development company, but they were planning to have phase 3 trials in Europe. Phase 3 trials mean that it's the last stage in drug development where you have the biggest number of people, hundreds of people that are being kind of treated. And then if the results are good, the regulators say, we approve it in Europe, we approve it in the US. MAPS, first thing, they didn't have money, they stopped their research in Europe, and secondly, they got a kind of a red card from FDA last year. There are other bigger companies like Compass, and a few others, MindMed, but they will commercialize their treatments in the US in 2028, 2029, maybe the earliest, and then they will think about Europe, so maybe 2030. There might be surprises. For instance, there is a foundation in Germany called Mind Foundation, and they received 30 million euro from Sprint, which is a German disruptive innovation agency. They are looking for another 30 million. They are optimistic they will find it, and they want to run something that is very rarely seen in the drug development space, which is a non-profits bringing treatments to market, because we have to remember that it's a very expensive kind of business. Your kind of price tag goes in hundreds of millions of euros to develop a drug and then commercialize it. But Mind, you know, is a foundation, already has some money. They want to do phase 3 bigger trials. So maybe we'll have a surprise. But there is one extra thing, just very briefly. We shouldn't be only looking at drug development and clinical trials. There are all sorts of frameworks for early access and compassionate use that we could maybe consider. They are actually, they could be very efficient ways of preparing us for then kind of EMA approval, when we could have small pilots where we could learn, you know, how these treatments work in the real setting rather than this artificial setting of clinical trials. So, you know, maybe, I think in Estonia, I'm sure you have some kind of legislation that defines the parameters for providing medical access to treatments that are still in the development. So, you know, this could be a way forward for now.
And one more question, since we're talking about international topics. Next Monday is Monday after next, on 20th, is a big turnaround in the US. Suddenly in the government close to the government is Elon Musk, who is microdosing, we all know that. We have Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is vaccine skeptic, but who is not psychedelic skeptic. In the US, we can expect huge shifts in official policy.
Yeah.
And how this will influence Europe.
Might very well happen, kind of playing with the devil or whatever you can call it. Next Monday, next week, I will actually be in Davos, where both Trump and Elon Musk said they will be there. There will be also talks on mental health and psychedelics I'll be participating in. But yeah,
it's a great sign that Davos is discussing those topics.
Yeah, they do. They are kind of at the front lines of innovation. I mean, whatever helps get these treatments to people, to patients, I guess, is good. But you also need to be careful and kind of understand that something that looks attractive for a short term might bring longer term damages, actually, if you don't get things right, and if you don't respect science and kind of certain things taking time. So yeah, I hope for the best. I cannot really say what will come out of it, but I hope for the best.
We don't know. None of us knows what will happen, but something might happen, and soon. Dr. Kleinberg, when we did interview for the video on this topic, we discussed, I remember one thing you said, we discussed who should use those drugs and who should benefit, and you said that there are people who are in so dark places in their life, in their brain, the traumas, and these drugs could really shiftly change their brains. So when we talk about these drugs, there is the stigma and all that, but there are people really in urgent need, and this could just maybe you can tell us a little bit on that too here. That was kind of thing that I came away with from our discussion, and I was thinking later in the evening on that.
It's very difficult to imagine for a person who is even treating those patients, but ordinary, common public people, they can't imagine what is actually happening to our trauma patients, what kind of violence our young people are experiencing in their homes, or what kind of violence people have experienced in other places, especially young people. If we think about, we don't have a lot of war veterans like in States, but of course we have also those guys also in Estonia, but they are already quite experienced, and they are also lost their life quality. But if I think about young people who are struggling with the traumas, and how it's very often experimentation, you just try to find a solution. We have a lot of good trauma therapists, but nevertheless, these conditions are very hard to treat, and our common drugs are not very efficient. They are only some level, but if you think that this person is like in early 20s, and I didn't talk today about Estonian suicide rate, especially when we were on a world top in 2015, and we are still not very much decreased on our youth suicide level. It is very shameful, but a lot of people are among of those who are actually committing suicide because they can't tolerate the experiences. And this is the reason why we need more efficient treatment, which is actually not your last choice if you have like tried all kind of SSRIs before, but it should be like the opposite. It should be possibility to choose it like a first choice also, because doctor's experience can also say that this is the case when it should be opposite. We shouldn't try all these common treatments and wait like months or maybe some years. These are very long cases. There are some people in Estonia, very young people, who actually they should stay at hospital like months and years not to kill themselves. And this is our reality. We are not talking about this very much, and therefore we need treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder patients and severely depressive. We have also young people who are depression. The depression treatment doesn't work, and this is also constantly suicidal young person who has no future. And this is the reason why, of course I know after 3 years there will be no big changes, but if I put on the same table suffering of our patients and my dreams, then of course it would be, tomorrow actually would be a good day, because there are a lot of people whose life is not going how it should be.
One statistics from the screen that I kind of was thinking about was that every fourth Estonian has some kind of psychiatric diagnosis. That seems like 1, 2, 3, 4. I would say the 4 here is me, because my struggles with alcoholism, they were very public at one point. Thanks God it was 8-9 years ago. But I needed treatment, and I didn't know where to turn in the beginning. Now I hear that ketamine can treat alcoholism. So how? What will happen when you have real dependency on something and you come to your treatment?
Well,
what will happen?
I personally still haven't actually tried to treat anyone with alcohol use disorder with ketamine. And this is one of the, the main focus has been on depression and anxiety and then PTSD mostly. Not so much on alcohol use disorder, although there have been some publications and one group in UK that has studied this topic a bit more. But
what will happen?
Actually,
what will happen in the brain that you can really turn off this need for alcohol?
Well, it's not too well studied currently, especially what happens in the brain when you treat somebody with alcoholism, for example, with psychedelic. But if I
alcohol use disorder.
Alcohol use disorder.
Is yesterday.
Yeah. But if I recall the papers that have been published by some of the pioneers of ketamine therapy, for example, like Russian psychiatrist Yevgeny Krupitsky, for example, or Eli Kolb, they have found that for ketamine to be effective for people with any substance use disorders, the publications are a bit old, they still use the term alcoholism or heroin addiction. It has to be a very high dosage of ketamine. And actually the same goes for the early studies with LSD and alcoholism. For some reason, these people need higher doses or very high doses. So that some kind of this near-death experience and this ego-dissolving experience has to happen for these kind of patients to actually get better.
But there is hope on that.
I personally see this area of substance use disorders as one of the most intriguing, actually, with the psychedelics.
Karl Kristjan, how can you as a computer scientist kind of advance this psychedelic research that we were talking?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if I'm strictly a computer scientist, but I think in terms of using computational neuroscience models, I think that's one of the things that you can definitely do. I think there's a slight issue right now that in terms of having reliable biochemical data based on which we can, kind of model the alterations in like, for example, single neuron activity, I think we're missing a little bit of stuff. I do think that in terms of using computational methods to kind of analyze, for example, fMRI images, EEG data, I think those things can definitely help, and that has been done a lot. But personally, I'm a little bit more interested into kind of creating models of biological neural networks and trying to, we looked into this, how to add the psychedelic effect, and it's a little bit complex and it's kind of hard to validate, but I think that's a pathway how to look into these type of things.
So we've been talking here now for half an hour. Your questions now. We promised to take questions. Please raise your hand. You can ask in Estonian, that's fine, we will translate. So does anybody have any questions after our debate? The microphone is right there.
Tere, on mind kuulda?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Küsiksin eesti keeles.
The microphone is not on.
Hallo.
Okei, lähemalt natuke.
Hallo.
Jaa, nüüd on hea.
Okei. Mul on küsimus just selle ketamiini ravi kohta, et kui tegemist on illegaalse ainega väljaspool siis nagu meditsiinilist tarvitamist, siis kuidas selle nagu üldse maale toomisega on, sest et Ravimiameti lehel on kirjas, et hetkel see ei ole mõeldud ikkagi PTSD või siis depressiooni raviks, et sellel on mingid muud näidustused, et kuidas te üldse seda ravimit siis saate ja kas Ravimiametiga on selles osas mingisuguseid probleeme olnud või kas nemad siis nagu täiendavad pidevalt neid nimekirju või kuidas see pool toimib?
I will translate. The question is about ketamine, how to bring ketamine actually to Estonia. If the official policy line is that this substance is not allowed in Estonia.
Well, ketamine has been allowed in Estonia for decades. But the indication officially has only been as an anesthetic. So the Estonian Society of Anesthesiologists, they have like this agreement with the Medicines Agency been for a long time that you don't have to like make an application or every time you want to use it for an anesthetic purpose. Now, as what goes for to use ketamine in psychiatry, we have to make. Now I'm speaking strictly about ketamine, not esketamine. We have to make an application to Medicines Agency every time we want to use it. And in our clinic, we did make that application. And they wanted to know about the indications. So it's an off-label use, but the Medicines Agency has to, they want to, because they need to approve this application, they're gonna overlook it. And that if they see that this is justified, this kind of use, then they will allow it. And it's not that difficult actually if you provide the sufficient information. What actually happened during this process when our clinic applied to get the supply of ketamine. Just a side note that in Estonia, the ketamine has mostly been replaced now by esketamine, and since it's mostly
what's the difference?
It's like a different enantiomer. When in ketamine there are two molecules and they're like mirror images of each other. Then esketamine is just one of them, and it's taken out of ketamine and they made like a separate medication out of it. But they're very similar. But for anesthesiology, as I've heard from anesthesiologists, it's a bit better for some reason to use for anesthesia. So it's been largely replaced the ordinary ketamine, as to say. So to get the supply of ketamine was a bit more difficult than I expected, in terms that we had to wait for the supply for about 2 or 3 months or something for it to arrive, because there wasn't any providers in Estonia for it. But what happened in our clinic actually, when I contacted the Medicines Agency about that we plan to use ketamine for psychiatric indications, the response was, we have never heard of that kind of use in psychiatry. And then
they read international magazines?
I'm quite surprised actually how. And then I had a discussion with them, and they said, "But how is this possible? Because I've used ketamine for like 3.5 years already, and then it's been used in Estonia for like over 10 years." And they said that nobody has ever reported, so they just wouldn't know. So it gave me a little bit how the Medicines Agency works. So they have this like thing in place that this is an obligation that you have to do it, but if you're not aware of this thing that you have to do this application, then you can just order it from some kind of pharmaceutical company, and it just arrives, and nobody asks any questions. So we were the first one who actually did it, and I think I know that they got this information from the other members of a psychiatric association, that they contacted all of the places that had used ketamine, and I reported on them basically. I wasn't planning to do that, and they contacted and said that they have to make an application the next time they plan to use it.
Questions? Anybody? Yes, here is a question. Where is the microphone? Would you please?
Ma küsin eesti keeles, kuna meil on nii palju rohkem siin eestlasi. Et mis seisus on Lõuna-Ameerikas teadus? Et me teame, et Peruus, Mehhikos, Costa Rical, Brasiilias on mingid ained mingitel tingimustel lubatud ja eelduslikult võiks siis olla see, et teadustööd on ka seal lihtsamini algatavad. Mis seisus see teadus on seal?
The question is about South America. In some countries, some substances are legally allowed. What is the state of science on those issues in South America? Who wants to take it? I know a person in this hall who could answer that question. Äkki saame teie käest küsida?
Yeah.
Seesama küsimus Lõuna-Ameerika kohta.
Et eri riikides on erinevad regulatsioonid. Näiteks Peruus on ayahuasca kasutamine igas keskkonnas täiesti legaalne, seda müüakse pudeliga turul, seda määritakse turistidele aktiivselt pähe ja iga aasta 2-3 turisti sinna ära kaovad. Nii et seda reguleerimismudelit ma Eestile ei soovitaks. Brasiilias on asi palju parem, seal on lubatud ayahuasca traditsiooniliseks ja spirituaalseks kasutamiseks, ehk siis religioossete ühingute tegevuse raames. Keegi ei kiusa põliselanikke, kes seda teevad ja ka teatavat raha küsivad oma tseremooniate eest, kuni nad seda laialt ei reklaami ja kuni nad ei reklaami seda ravina, et ravina reklaamida seda seal ei tohi. Et Brasiilia regulatsioon on täiesti mõistlik ja vaatamata sellele, et Brasiilia on palju suurem kui Peru, seal suuri jamasid sellega ei ole, et on selline mõistlik tasakaalupunkt leidunud. Seal tuleb arvestada ka sellega, et sealsel rahval on need traditsioonid juba olemas. Et ütleme, on olemas rahvaid, kellel on head alkoholi tarvitamise traditsioonid, kreeklased ja prantslased oskavad juua niimoodi, et ei teki massilist sõltuvust ja ei ole käpp maas inimestel, aga mõnedel inimestel, kellel kus maal viinamarja ei kasva, siis sellega on palju suuremad probleemid.
Suur aitäh! Elle Kaasik on Eesti tuntuim ayahuasca ekspert, kes on kaitsnud sel teemal Tartu Ülikoolis ka doktoritöö ja ta on ka füüsikadoktor, nii et tema oskab neid küsimusi väga hästi seletada. Aitäh! Et täpsemalt ma ütleksin veel, et teaduse tegemise kohta olen käinud Brasiilias seda teadust tegemas ja kuna seal ayahuasca on legaalne, siis oli seal ka labor olemas, kus on inimesed, labor, meetod ja mingeid tohutuid taotlusi loa kohta ei pidanud kuskilt täitma, et seal oli tõesti nagu juriidiliselt lihtsam seda teadust teha. So this was a picture in South America. Is Europe kind of cooperating with South America also on those issues of research and those traditional societies there?
So yeah, I think here we speak about different ways of accessing and using psychedelics. And as it was mentioned, you know, they are part of a culture in certain places. And let's not forget that classical psychedelics like psilocybin have been, or ayahuasca have been used for, you know, hundreds of years, if not millennia. So they are nothing new. I think there is a thing to be said about use, which is in the indigenous kind of context, use, which is in a context of self-development, and use, which is in a medical context where we want to provide these treatments for people who are very, very vulnerable because they have, for instance, treatment-resistant depression or, you know, anorexia for that matter. So these are different ways of use, and psychedelics can be legal in some jurisdictions, but it doesn't mean that they are suitable for medical use. So I would just add that.
I have a question to Tadeusz, actually. I was wondering if you know why hasn't any European Union country so far implemented this compassionate use as Switzerland and Canada and US have done? Like, are there any like specific obstacles in here about?
Just please define also what is compassionate use.
The compassionate use is well the same programs that some other countries use for like patients who are treatment resistant to available medications. So in this form of this treatment, you can get an access to medications that have not yet been fully approved, but there is at least some scientific evidence. Usually it has to be at least like the second clinical trial, like phase evidence that it has been shown to be at least somewhat effective and safe.
Yeah. So unfortunately we cannot have something like what Switzerland or Australia have at the EU level, and that's because while the European Medicines Agency provides some overall frames for the compassionate use or early access programs, it's a competence again of member states to set the exact parameters. There are over 20 countries that allow this type of use in some shape or form. There are a few countries that don't even have any legislation at all. but it will be up to each and single country to define, how you can use them. Some countries will say compassionate use can be only used when phase 3 trials finished and EMA approval is pending. Some countries will have legislation that will say you can use it with maybe phase 2 trial compounds. But I think again that this is an area to really explore, and also in Estonia it would be good for you to understand better the rules here, and then what could be maybe possible. One thing also to say is that there is safety that we should be showing, and efficacy of drugs, but there is also a cost of inaction, and sometimes it feels to me that we value the life lost due to action more than we value the life lost due to inaction. And you mentioned a lot of people who really need help, and they need help now. So I hope that we can get the balance better here, because mental health conditions, they are also deadly. There are, in the WHO European region, well over 100,000 people who take their lives every year. And when you have a severe mental health condition, your life expectancy can go down by even more than 20 years. So I think there should be a certain urgency, and that's what Australia recognized, descheduling or downscheduling psilocybin and MDMA for treatment-resistant depression and for PTSD.
Questions? Here's a question.
I tried in English, and if I fail, I go on to Estonian. We are walking here in a thin ice, and we are already expressing that we are this science-based, and we need to be, and it's regulated and controlled. But you are looking for like this public support and like widespread support. Is there any chance that in one day we can admit that those people who today we are calling like illegals and those retreats in the forests and whatever, shamans, they have experiences with these substances for 10 of years. Is this, will be that one day that we can be here and say that you are shaman, we have this experience, and talk publicly, really publicly about this, because if we combine this medical part, which is very important, I totally agree with it, should be safe for everybody, and this actual knowledge which is already there in the field. Thank you.
There is, if I may very briefly, there is something that is called discipline arrogance, and I think that and there is also something called psychedelics exceptionalism, and we should be kind of careful not to fall into these categories, and we should be very respectful of the fact that these compounds have been used in a very contained manner for a long time. We once issued recommendations to the European Medicines Agency saying that people who already have an experience with these compounds, which is not regulated, and organizations that represent psychedelics should be included in these discussions. And then Politico, based on this, wrote an article called "Experienced Trippers Should Advise EMA." That's a catchy title, but yeah, I hope that in the future different ways of usage can go hand in hand, that maybe there could be some kind of triage. Of course, we will not send people with treatment-resistant depression to retreats, but maybe people who are okay and they can decide on what they put in their body and what kind of state of mind they want to be in. If it's done in a regulated way, if there are checks and balances in place and safety measures, I don't see why we wouldn't have a society where these different planes can coexist, medical use and other types of use. But the organization I am leading, PAREA, is focusing on the future medical use, because we think that in this way we can help the biggest amount of people, and especially the type of people that will never go to retreats or underground practices.
Your opinions, doctors?
It's very difficult to treat people who have like self-treated themselves, and even I started to think what Viljar was talking about alcohol. Alcohol is a legal substance which is a lot used to treat themselves. Depressed males are usually doing this, and also cannabis, etc. And as you said, a huge ketamine dosage is needed to treat them. What I'm trying to say is that if it's not considered how it is done, and I don't know how shamans are doing their work, but probably they have their own code of ethics, how to do it. But the responsibility or taking responsibility, what you are actually doing, I'm just as a doctor saying that if it has been like wild self-treatment with all kind of things that person, I have been treating young people and they have done big damages for their brains, and it's very difficult to treat them. Ordinary medicine doesn't work anymore, or you have to use a very difficult combinations or high dosages. And I think that if a human being is clever and thinking what he is doing, and the helper is also somehow thinking and taking responsibility, this is a possibility to negotiate and share this experience. But if one party must take responsibility and give like guarantee that they are doing proper work, and others are just doing what they fancy, or just person is self-medicating themselves, it is just at the end it's not possible to treat in any way. Because if you go out of borders and doing dangerous things with your brain, which is actually the most delicate organ in our body, and therefore we don't have good enough treatment also, because it's a very, very special organ. It's very difficult to find good treatment for such a special part of our body. And it's very easy also to ruin. And so it's responsibility, I think. And young people, they don't take responsibility, and also hopeless people don't. And it's in a way humanly understandable that if you have lost your hope, then you are trying to do all kind of things. And therefore, it would be better, in my mind, if science is doing their part and giving some kind of parameters, what is dangerous, what is not, to take care of our brain. Because to be a human is such a big issue, and we have to take care of our brain. It's flexible, healthy, and not to just drive over with some hard machinery with no responsibility.
Okay.
I can maybe add. I mean, this is kind of like speculative, but I think on this topic there are a bunch of to arrange a host of studies that seem to suggest that psychedelics not just can be useful to decreasing symptoms of disorders, even though I want to say that I think treatment comes first in terms of developing models or I think discussion in general, but there are studies that do seem to suggest that psychedelics can also promote like a flourishing or a eudaimonic kind of purpose and help in social functioning in terms of in healthy people, which can also lead to prevention or prophylactic effect in terms of development of mental health disorders. And I think a host of these studies maybe is a bit speculative, and some of them are population studies, and it's maybe important to kind of be a bit careful. But there is some evidence that seems to rather point that the psychedelic effect is towards that direction, rather in a general, statistically meaningful negative direction.
Mm-hmm. And healthy people is an interesting term anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, mental health it's something that is kind of existing on a complex spectrum. It's not like we are mentally ill only or mentally healthy. It's much more than the lack or the absence or a presence of disorder. You know, you can be depressed and have a good day. You can be okay and then kind of be low. And so there are challenges, you know, with us kind of putting these diseases in different boxes. And I think the easiest example to take is, how about couples therapies? Would psychedelics be helpful there? It's not exactly, because we are here operating in a paradigm of treatments of disorders. You know, if you have kind of problems in your relationship, obviously this is not exactly something that you will pathologize, but would, you know, psychedelics be useful in this case? And, you know, I very much agree that we should be really taking care of our brain, and, you know, if we want to kind of go and do some trapeze, let's make sure that the net is kind of solid, and a lot of people are not doing this. So we, you know, psychedelics are very powerful substances, and they need to be treated with great care and responsibility, be it in a therapeutic context or in other contexts. But we also should be careful of things will be going wrong. The more use, the more we'll see, you know, even deaths. But if, you know, let's take riding a bicycle as an example. There are hundreds of thousands of bike accidents. Some are unfortunately deadly, but if there is an accident, a deadly bike accident or an accident, no one will say, oh, you know, bikes are wrong and we should, like, there is something inherently wrong with the bikes. We will be, as a society, coming up with ways to make the biking experience safer, with helmets, with regulations, with raising awareness and so on. And I think that we should be kind of honest that psychedelics have been always part of the human history, and trying to kind of pretend they are not there is just, that has never worked. So how we can come together as societies and make their use safer, whatever the context is.
This is a great thought to end our discussion. Our time is almost there to end it. We've been discussing it over 3 hours. It went really fast. Thank you for being here at the panel. One big topic we didn't really address is the end-of-life care and psychedelics. That's a big topic. So there are lots of topics to discuss during this campaign and in the future. Thank you. Tänan kõiki, kes osalesid. Sellega on meie üritus ametlik osa lõppenud.